they sort of were referred to as kind of entertainment architecture. It's a way of a building being themed, but the building itself having the theme, not the building is based on the Little Mermaid or something. Like the building has its own story in a way that is completely neglected today.
That is Drew Taylor, and you're listening to the Tomorrow Society podcast. Hey there, thanks for joining me here on episode 182 of the Tomorrow Society podcast. I am your host, Dan Heaton. My guest today is Drew Taylor, a podcaster on Fine Tuning with Jim Hill and the Light the Fuse podcast. Also writes a lot about Disney for a variety of publications. And what we're talking about today is postmodern architecture and Disney. Michael Eisner connected with a lot of legendary architects in the late 80s, early 90s for buildings like the Swan and Dolphin, the Team Disney building, a lot of other just incredible structures. And we're diving into what makes those important and how it connects to the aesthetics of the park moving forward, from Eisner's approach through Bob Iger through Bob Chapek. And this also leads us into talking about the D23 Expo and recent announcements or lack thereof, current approach to the parks from Disney, a lot of other related issues about what's happening, but all kind of springing back to that idea of these really interesting buildings that are still with us today. So there's a lot to cover, so let's get right to it. Here is Drew Taylor. So Drew,
Yes.
it's really cool to have you on the show. I've listened to you many times talking about a variety of topics, but today we're mostly focusing on Disney and theme parks. So what's your background with, I know you've written a lot about the parks. Obviously,
Yes.
You're on Fine Tuning where you talk with Jim Hill about animation, but what's your background with the parks or with Disney and everything else growing up?
Well, I mean, growing up, I think we probably had a similar background in that I went to the parks a lot as a kid. And I really remember that kind of, the halcyon days of like the late 80s, early 90s, where Epcot was really firing on all cylinders. MGM had opened and it was so amazing. The parks were so well kept. And so that is my kind of like, those are my, the times that I really treasure. And I'm sure we'll talk about animation later, but that's where I really got interested in animation too, because walking through those corridors and seeing the animators working at Disney MGM, and then I did a backstage tour. I remember I was on the tour, and I would always like clip things out of magazines and stuff, and I was asking about movies that were in production. And the woman giving the tour was like, "How did you know about that?" And I was, a 10-year-old kid with like a binder full of, clippings and things. So that's how I really got interested. And then, as an adult, getting into different aspects of the parks and learning more about them and befriending some people who worked there. It's been really fun. And it really sucks that it's such an unpleasant experience in 2022 to go, because they used to be such a great place to go and hang out and be inspired, but yeah, it's kind of a drag.
Yeah, and I'm sure in California, because I went to Florida with a family and we had a great time, but there's a lot of legwork involved with that, and
yes,
it's a different experience. I mean, you mentioned Epcot too, because I think of you as being younger. Like I went in the mid '80s when I was 8 in 1984, so I was 6 when it opened. And I know you mentioned going a little later, but I know you've grabbed onto that. So,
yes,
even going a little later, you still kind of got on the edge of the heyday, it seems like.
Yeah, I mean, going on Horizons and World of Motion and, Great Movie Ride. And these were really formative things as a child. And Maelstrom, and when that opened, it was such a big deal. And it was so funny to go as a kid and like not know what was open or not. Like, whoa, maybe this will be ready, and it was so exciting. But yeah, that first version of Epcot, I would say I think Test Track is actually a great kind of renovation of World of Motion.
Oh yeah.
Like so maybe like even going towards like 98 or something, like you had Animal Kingdom open, which at first I was sort of an Animal Kingdom skeptic, and now I think it's absolutely like amazing. And I wish I had done the first version of the safari and everything. I hadn't done that until many years later, but yeah, it was a really exciting time back then.
Yeah, I think, for me too, just you think about all, I mean, not like you said, not knowing, like I remember watching Maelstrom, they had a special with Willard Scott on, which is on YouTube. It's ridiculous, where he was like writing it and was really scared and was like, "This is the most frightening thing ever." And as a kid, you're like, "Oh my gosh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that." And but even yeah, with the internet the way it was, even as far as Animal Kingdom, I went there in '98 in like June, and we didn't really know what was going to be there. Like there's specials, so I think that might have added to it because now it's like I don't really try to watch the YouTube videos before they come out, but it's hard. It just kind of like Rise of the Resistance. It just kind of seeps into your brain, even if you never
Yeah.
watched it. It's like somehow I saw the whole ride, even though I never watched a YouTube video. So it was really cool. I think that's partially why it was probably so impactful.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't have 10 websites updating you every day on the flavor of churro changing in Frontierland or whatever. It was like, oh, this is really cool. And and they were really trying things back then, and I really have a soft spot for Alien Encounter, even though I know it has sort of been widely derided, but I feel like we should celebrate its oddness. And that was very exciting. Like Tomorrowland 94 was very kind of impactful. And yeah, I mean, obviously I'm an old man now and not as prone to wonder, but I feel like there isn't that kind of sense, of discovery anymore that you get. And what was going to be in Interventions this time, and all that stuff. It was really fun, and yeah, it has left a real impression on me over the years.
I like how I'm in my 40s and I think you're in like your 30s and
Yes.
we're the old guys looking back on when things were great. It's like, oh my gosh, what has happened?
Yeah, we're like the World War II survivors. The
Yeah.
last person to ride Horizons will die out one day, and then all memory of it will be gone. Yeah.
We will never hear about it again once this person is gone. I know that you're a writer and that's kind of your career,
Mhm.
but I mean, you mentioned having your clippings when you were going to the animation. When did you really get interested in kind of becoming a writer and especially with entertainment, like interested in that side of it?
Well, I realized that I couldn't draw for beans. That was my first thing, Dan, as I wanted to be an animator, and then I realized I could not be an animator, so I figured I would write about animation. But the other thing that I did, I forgot about this, is that I went to the Disney Institute as a kid and took a couple of classes, which I don't know. Did you ever get to go or?
We never did. I remember they always really pushed it on the vacation planning videos. Like you could
Yeah,
go mountain climbing and learn
yeah.
computers. And I'm like, oh, but we never went actually. So what was that like?
And I did a stop motion class and a computer animation class. So it was really interesting. At that time, too, they were sort of like courting the Wallace and Gromit creators, Aardman Animation, to work with Disney. I think that at one point they secured the Wallace and Gromit theme park rights, but didn't obviously ever do anything with it. And yeah, so that was really exciting. I mean, the writing about animation was something that I feel like maybe I was just destined to do at this point, just for lack of a better option. But yeah, I love it so much, and obviously the history of Disney, as you know, is so rich and so worth plumbing, as you have done so brilliantly on the show.
Well, I mean, so you mentioned animation and of course writing about animation, which I don't know if writing about animation is really the career path everyone is just like zooming in on. So but you found a nice niche there. You wrote The Art of Onward, you were an author for
Yes.
that. So how did you get where, for that or just in general where I guess circling back to even your interest in animation enough to write about it?
Yeah, I mean, I've started to do these things the last couple of years where I like kind of do these epic histories of animated projects or earlier this year, I did a huge piece on John Carter, which is sort of pseudo animated, but I had obviously been around Pixar a long time and worked with them for years and years and years, covering every movie. And so they just asked me to do Art of Onward. They knew that unlike most of the Art of books, this one had to have more text. It's like the Art of Brave book and the Art of Onward book are the ones that sort of have more text in them. So they wanted me to come do that because it wasn't just sort of like, putting captions next to illustrations or whatever. So I got drawn into that, and it was really it was a wonderful experience. I would do it again in a heartbeat. Obviously, I just loved it. But what I've really gotten very passionate about these last couple of years is doing these like deep dives into some specific area of Disney animation history. I just did one on the Rocketeer animated sequence, the kind of Nazi propaganda sequence. And yeah, so that's really been my passion. Those are the things that I love doing the most. I cover every movie that comes out and a lot of TV, but like that has been really, really fun for me.
Well, how do you, when you're doing like one of those pieces where you're doing the huge history of John Carter, how do you go about doing that? I'm not asking you to go through every step, but just in general, because you have to just get so many people to kind of, especially with like an oral history type article, you're just digging through like so much information.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is like, and this goes back to, we'll talk about it too, I'm sure, like The Fuse, my Mission Impossible podcast, is it becomes this game of telephone where you talk to somebody and they go, oh, who you should really talk to is so-and-so. For John Carter, I didn't think I was going to get, Lynn Collins or Willem Dafoe, and I was so happy that they agreed to do it. Taylor Kitsch did not do it. I mean, that's different because I know he's still in, processing, and I get it. I sympathize with him. So, that's really interesting. And the other thing about animation too is these guys are all around and they're still working, and they have a lot of stuff. Like they're kind of collectors themselves. I'm sure as a lot of the people you've talked to can attest, they just kind of have all this stuff. So when I'm, doing Runaway Brain, I did Runaway Brain for Polygon last Halloween, and like, the director had all these maquettes and things that nobody had seen in years. So it was really wonderful to do that. And I think that I kind of have a reputation now of like really telling these stories in great detail. So, people can vouch for me. And also the good thing is so many of them don't work at Disney anymore, which is the best thing, because if you try,
yes,
there was somebody on Runaway Brain, I think, who's still there, Ian Gooding, who was the production designer on Encanto. They were like, nope, you can't talk to him. I was like, man, come on. Like the one person I still need to talk to. I made friends, with Andreas and a bunch of the Mike Gabriel and a lot of these guys that were there in the late 80s and early 90s, which is really the period that I focus on and what I love to talk about. So as long as they're willing to talk, I am definitely willing to listen.
Yeah, I have a similar experience. It's a lot of it is just connecting one person to another and figuring that out. That's interesting. And then I should mention, before we dive into kind of our big topics, the Fine Tuning podcast you do with Jim Hill, who I have not spoken with, but I've talked to Len Testa, his co-host on the Disney Dish, many times. And you guys focus on a lot of animated films and TV series. But like, what today is exciting you about animation, or where things are going right now?
Well, just the different types of animation. I'm working on a giant piece about the history of Sony Pictures animation, which I think is so interesting. And obviously Spider-Verse and Mitchell's has really kind of blown out what you think of as a commercial animated, Western animated feature. And so that's really exciting to me. And I think, I think Pixar and Disney Animation have been doing some really exciting stuff the last few years too. I think Strange World is going to be great. I haven't seen all of that yet, but, obviously Pinocchio, Guillermo's Pinocchio is coming out, which is going to be really wonderful. I've seen about 40 minutes of that. And yeah, it feels like a very exciting time for animation. I really love covering it. There's so many different types of movies, and there's a new Henry Selick movie out next week on Netflix, which is fabulous. And yeah, it's just great. Really, really great.
I agree because, I have kids where we often are watching the newest animated films, and I really appreciate when there are things, even like some of the Disney releases, like Encanto or even Lightyear, which was kind of interesting in its own way. And you mentioned the Mitchells vs. Machines, which was great. But when you see ones that aren't good, oh boy, oh boy. So it's good that there are
Yes.
so many that for me are interesting too.
Yeah, you can really tell when it's not bringing its A game. We love Sing 2, maybe a little bit of a step down. They're not all created equal. But I think the ones that are willing to take these kind of chances are really exciting. And yeah, I love Lightyear. I don't know if you got a chance to listen to the Lightyear the Fuse episodes we did with Angus.
I haven't yet, but I noticed, I was like, wow, they did a lot of Lightyear episodes. I need to catch up with a lot of these.
Yeah, it was supposed to be 30 minutes, and it ended up being like an hour and a half. And I felt so bad because there was a Pixar publicist on the call, and I can just see her just like rolling her. These guys are still talking about Mission Impossible. What is going on? But it was a really great chat.
All right. Well, when I reached out to you originally, Drew, I will say
yes,
one of the things you were very interested in talking about was postmodernist architecture and Disney, which is super cool, but I'll admit I'm not an expert on it. I would love to tell you that I am, but I'd love to know what made you want to talk about that and what kind of interested you about the topic in terms of Disney.
Well, what I love about it, I'm going to quote, one of my favorite articles about it, which was a New York Times article called Disney Deco. That's what they called it. They called this kind of movement Disney Deco. And what I am so inspired by is this idea that Michael Eisner, who obviously is a huge freak when it comes to architecture, he wanted Disney to become a place where he would kind of collect the leading architects in the world and have them make buildings for Disney in the same way that he would I think Woody Allen, sadly, is mentioned in this article, but the way that he would get, these great filmmakers to come and work for the company. And it just, talking again about the 80s and 90s, I think this is part of the reason that period excites me so much, are these amazing buildings that were being built at the time. And you look at the building, the studio hadn't really changed in 20 years since Walt had passed away. And then he puts in this giant Michael Graves building with the dwarves and everything, and it's just really, really exciting. And I love the way that he used architecture. I love the way that he implemented it. I love the chances that he took. It's just and it's a topic that hasn't really been discussed and is never discussed on podcasts that look back towards the history of Disney, even though these architects had such a huge impact on the parks, on the, corporate buildings, as we've seen, like with the casting building in Florida, the, Euro Disney Preview Center. Okay, here's the quote that I have. Eisner calls them the Steven Spielbergs, George Lucas's, and Woody Allen's of architecture. And there were a handful of architects that he utilized that were really exciting. And the buildings are still there. I mean, that's really the good part. You can turn Hotel New York into Art of Marble, but darn it, that's still a Michael Graves building through and through. So, it's pretty interesting to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, I went this March and stayed at the Swan, which I hadn't really stayed at before.
Amazing.
I mean, you look at those buildings, and I know I've heard people say like, oh, they're so from that time and dated, but I'm like, they're insane. And I mean that in a good way. Like the ambition where I think especially Eisner in the first 10 years, I guess pre-Frank Wells dying and everything else, like he brought that ambition to everything where sometimes things failed. Like, I mean, I would not say that Disneyland Paris failed because that park is incredible, but failed financially, like where they spent too much money on hotels and everything. But I love the daringness because those buildings still hold up pretty well and makes you feel like you're staying at kind of, even though, I mean, they're owned by Marriott, you don't feel like you're staying at a normal Marriott there.
Yeah, I mean, to be at those hotels too when they first opened, when Graves actually had designed the ashtrays and everything in there. I mean, I obviously am scouring eBay all the time looking for things that have fallen off the truck or the warehouse or whatever. But he also, like, Graves did the site planning for Crescent Lake. I mean, that whole area is really kind of postmodern mecca because Robert A.M. Stern, who's another one of the big players in this movement, he designed the boardwalk and the yacht and beach club. And then you have obviously the two big Graves hotels there. So it's really amazing. And I would argue that, Disneyland Paris, at least that initial version was kind of like, that was like the postmodern Disney aesthetic run amok. Like each one of those hotels is so individualistic, so beautiful, and so outrageous completely. You were right. And even Disney Village, right? I think Frank Gehry designed a lot of Disney Village, and that's now completely getting ripped apart. But at least initially, that was a really, that was some serious stuff. That was, if you were an architecture person, I mean, that is amazing. It's still amazing. I'm just, every time I walk into the Team Disney Burbank building, I'm totally amazed. And Gary did the one in Anaheim. And what's interesting too is you look at the buildings that were being built and what the company was doing, and it was like, okay, they're going to get the Ducks, but the Ducks already have a stadium. So how are we going to make this, like, how is he going to put his stamp on it? And then Gary designs the training center. I mean, it's like, it's so crazy. And I know I'm jumping ahead, but we're going to talk about sort of like what architecturally is going on now. And it's just so night and day. It's like, even I feel like if you didn't appreciate them at the time, it's a lot easier to go, wow, that was insane and awesome. And I wish we could go back.
Well, luckily, like you said, some of the buildings are there because something like a Horizons, like for an attraction example, comically destroyed basically with pictures and everything else. These are still there because I think about that building you mentioned, the Team Disney building, where I've never stepped foot in there, but I can see a picture and immediately go, oh, because it's so distinctive, you immediately know what it is. It's not like, now where is that building or whatever else? It stands out. And same with Swan and Dolphin, same with all the examples you referenced, that it's just right away, one, they almost look like alien in a good way, but I mean just like they just were picked up and dropped. Like, how did someone build this? But also just inventive. And like you said, I mean, that's something that I think Eisner took away, not just in the parks, like expanding the resort so much, even beyond that, not just with postmodern, but like the Wilderness Lodge, Animal Kingdom Lodge, some of those he brought in architects, or Grand Californian, just like really expansive buildings. We were like, this place is crazy. Oh yeah, I could go to the park too even.
And he knew where to kind of like, push the gas and where to let off. I think that those buildings that were built during his tenure are all really impressive and really distinct, and also speak to a way of, they sort of were referred to as kind of entertainment architecture. And it's a way of a building being themed, but the building itself having the theme, not the building is based on the Little Mermaid or something. Like, the building has its own story in a way that is completely neglected today. I mean, it's like, you totally get what the boardwalk is. And even when it, without, it was supposed to have the roller coaster and all of that and the underwater theater, and that didn't happen, but you still totally understand. It was the first hotel to use flats like they did in the park, and it's just like, you get it. You walk in and you get it. You walk into that new tower at, what's the kind of Southwest themed hotel?
Coronado Springs.
Grandestino. Where it's like, it's the Dali, thing. And it's like, you walk in and you could be in Atlanta. You could literally be in Atlanta at a convention center hotel. And it's like, where am I? What is the story? Like, it's all very opaque now. There is a real specificity to those buildings.
Yeah, like the Polynesian, they haven't done it, but they announced like an extra DVC area. And the joke was, and then they did that, it didn't end up happening, but they were going to have that Fort Wilderness Hotel Reflections, which everyone just, but both of them looked like a really nice Marriott, or really nice, pick your poison, Radisson, Holiday Express, whatever, and that's fine. I'll stay at those when I'm driving somewhere or when I'm stopping in a city. But kind of circling back to the ones we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think that the appreciation has grown? Because I know at the time when Eisner did anything, especially with some of these buildings, there was probably a lot of snickering at him trying to bring in these architects and have like buildings that are so ambitious, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. No one talks about these buildings. I feel like I am the only one screaming on Twitter about this stuff and on Instagram, putting up old buildings on my story. But to me, the impact and the legacy just cannot be overstated. Even something like the Port Canaveral terminal is this like beautiful. It's built by this firm called Architectronica, who were working on the hotel in Times Square that Disney wanted to do there, but it's still just an amazing building. They also did the initial All Star hotels. There's just so many things to kind of like wonder at. The casting building, in Florida is so amazing. It's so cool, and also kind of like charting how these designs influenced other buildings, like how the Euro Disney Preview Center, which was built by Stern, influenced his designs for the animation building, which has become so iconic, obviously, with that hat in Burbank. And I recently talked to Eisner about this because I was like, you really like made, because there's a new Frank Gehry building that Warner Discovery is building right now. And I was like, you made Burbank, this postmodern mecca. And he was like, well, maybe, I don't know. But it's a really amazing legacy. Like I really hope that you can see that they're kind of trying to chip away at things. The clown is gone from the boardwalk
Oh, I
pool and
know.
things like that. But it's still, if you squint hard enough, it's still like, you're right. It's not a pit in the ground like Horizons became. It is, it's still there. It's still, they're all still making money to one degree or another. Yeah, I mean, I'm just always amazed. Anytime I'm in one of those spaces, whether it's ABC or, the Swan or Dolphin, I just love it. I just soak it up. It's amazing to me.
Well, the boardwalk, I have not stayed there, but just from the most recent experience, one, just being able to walk around there, what literally 2 minutes from your hotel is incredible, even if you don't stay there. But that whole area is just set up so well. We're
Yeah.
there, and I'm like, I mean, it's expensive as all, get up, but I'm like, I don't know, it would be hard to not stay somewhere around here. And it's just because, again, it's so easy to walk around, but the boardwalk itself, like you said, it's just like it wasn't even that crowded, and you've got, performers, you got people riding
Yeah.
those weird bikes, you got all this stuff going on. And it's like, yeah, I mean, it's Disney, whatever. It does, but it kind of feels like a boardwalk and it's designed so well that really sells it.
And again, I think that's part of that is the kind of Graves Stern influence of like these people built like office buildings and apartment buildings, and they know how to move people and still have this amazing design. I think I asked Eisner if Yacht Club is still his favorite. He wouldn't confirm, but that's what I've heard is when he goes down, he still stays at the Yacht Club, which is such an amazing. I mean, those two hotels are really wonderful too,
Oh,
and they're so like kind of understated, but like the theming is just great, and it's not a bunch of stuff on the walls that are harkening back to some animated movie. Like it's just great. It's a real kind of shift in perspective from that era to Iger, and now I think the further dissolution with Chapek. It's just wonderful. It's a fascinating period, and obviously we lost Graves a few years ago. Stern is still kicking it. Frank Gehry just did Michael Eisner's like Winter Cottage, which is amazing. I suggest you look it up. It is insane. But yeah, I mean, all these people are still contributing, and it's really amazing.
well, I try generally to have a positive perspective, which helps me with the world the way it is and
Yes.
just everything. But we should talk about how things have been since because, I mean, I think there have been, especially under Iger, like if you think about the parks, there have been individual lands that I thought were put together well, like your Buena Vista Street, like your Pandora, the World of Avatar, like they just did the entrance to Epcot, turned out pretty well. But I think what you're really getting at more is kind of the overall aesthetics, not just one land being good, but just kind of the overall approach. So I'm curious because this is something you wanted to talk about too. So I would love to know like what's kind of beyond just the lack of ambition with the resorts. I mean,
Yeah.
what is like I don't know because I would think they're ambitious in other ways, like with what they're doing with TV and movies, different things, but just don't seem to have that with the parks and resorts right now.
Yeah. I don't know what's going on with the parks. I really don't. I mean, I wrote a lot about the Imagineering exodus the last year, and we saw today that Bob Weiss retired.
Yeah.
Sure, he did. He did not want to go to Florida, so he was sent packing. That kind of thing. It's like there seems to be a real brain drain at Imagineering for sure, but also a complete lack of ambition. What I told you, I wanted to talk about kind of like the aesthetic cost of the Iger and Chapek administrations, because it really, it's like they're still putting up buildings and they're still making rides that are just like very lackluster. And, it's really, I mean, I'm sure you remember Kevin Yee's, declining by degrees, columns. What website was that on? Was that on MySage?
Was that on Mice Chat? I think it was on Mice Chat, if I remember right.
Yeah, Mice Chat. So like, I think about that a lot. That it really is this kind of like, you're getting less, you're paying more, and the experience is not what it was. And also like there's this huge aesthetic kind of like drain on things where you're right, like that Polynesian DVC building just looks terrible. A great example is that Swan and Dolphin DVC or whatever it is, that new tower.
Swan Reserve, yeah.
The Reserve,
I saw that when I was there.
And it just looks like a Ramada Inn next to these two like towering, when I love this story so much. When Eisner was on 60 Minutes in 1988, which is an interview I'm sure you've seen before, it's him and Jane Pauley, and he's talking about his commitment to animation and all this stuff. And he walks by a model of the Swan and Dolphin. And at the time, because people were so into these architects, they spotted it and knew it was a Graves building, before. And it was this big like outcry of like, oh my God, he's like doing a crazy Graves project. The famous story with that was that it was just going to be like some Marriott. And he had this like crazy bake-off of all these different people. And he chose the Swan and Dolphin. And you just don't get, like, was there a bake-off for the Grand Destino Tower, or did somebody like, loosely change some, file in their computer and came up with that? It's bad. It's really, really bad. It's not a great time to be a Disney Parks fan, I will say.
Well, I mean, that leads well into the D23 Expo, which
yes,
because, it was one of those things. We had the height of the pandemic, with restrictions and everything else.
Yes.
So then they moved this back to this year, and there was a lot of rumors out there about they're going to bring the People Mover back. They're going to update Tomorrowland. They're going to update Imagination. They're going to, a lot of things that seem legit, not the like pie in the sky. They're going to have a new World Showcase Pavilion or things that I don't know if I'll see in my lifetime, but things that seemed legit. And they made some announcements that I thought were okay, like small announcements. But I guess, what are your overall thoughts on what they announced? And then we could dig into this blue sky finale part, because I think that really relates to what you're talking about.
Yeah.
How they handled that.
Yeah, I can't wait to talk about. Yeah, that was insane. I mean, were you there? Did you go?
I was not there, but I was. Okay. They live streamed it, so I was.
That's right. That's right. So. Okay, so yeah, I mean, obviously I thought the announcements were pretty lackluster. I mean, how many times can you introduce a walk around character, and why is it taking 10 months to get Drinkfinder and Figment back when
just Figment?
They were
Figment.
Oh, just Figment. Is it going to be the big Figment? Is it like
they haven't said? They just showed a picture, but I mean, the big Figment would be hilarious, I would say.
Yeah,
but I think it's going to be a big Figment. That's my understanding. Okay. My guess.
Why that takes 8 months to deploy, I will never know. I mean, how many? I wanted to do a list of things announced at D23 that have never been built, because really that's the more interesting story. I mean, we got a little bit of a clarification of what that Avengers ride is going to be, although I don't think it's actually going to happen.
Really? Not even the new version? It's not
even the new version. Yeah, I will be very surprised. I mean, that is really, if we're talking about like sad Disney things, like Avengers Campus just sucks so bad, and it's so disappointing. And Feige is such a Parks fan. I cannot believe that he's like, I would literally make like the most successful movies ever, and this is my land. There's a bombed out Circuit City with a ride that was at Legoland 5 years ago, and a weird magic show with Doctor Strange. It's just terrible. But yeah, I mean, I thought that whole thing was really sad. I mean, it wasn't quite as. I remember last D23 sitting in there and seeing the Moana stuff in Spaceship Earth that they showed in the concept art, and my like the pit of my stomach just dropping out. I was so upset about it. I still think Epcot is sucking, just in a less kind of like visible way. I mean, we'll see when all the construction walls come down. But what I don't understand is like, what is the difference between the parks now?
Right.
Like they're all kind of Magic Kingdom. I don't understand why Zootopia is in Animal Kingdom when it seems like that would be more of a Magic Kingdom thing, especially with roadies, no animals with pants eat it.
Right.
It was a bummer. No, I was just incredibly depressed. I don't know how you felt.
Well, it's weird because the presentation, they started out and they're like, we're bringing back Happily Ever After. And then, they're really hitting it. I mean, they had weirdly long segments introducing The Mandalorian, which, sure, that's one thing I will say about Avengers Campus. I think they've done a good job with the characters, but that's not all they should have in the land.
But the reason that those characters are there, this is what's interesting, and no one ever talks about this, is that Parks is not paying for those characters. Right. Disney Plus or Marvel Studios or whoever, or Studio, Walt Disney Studio, is paying for the characters. They're not actually paying. It's the same thing with the Star Tours scenes. Those scenes were paid for by Lucas. Like, that's why they're there. And you're right. It's a total, like, we learned from Galaxy's Edge being a total, like, boner. Like, we have to put characters in this. Galaxy's Edge is such a disappointment. I don't know how you haven't really tell me what you're feeling about Galaxy's Edge.
I feel like the two attractions are good. I think the land itself looks good, but I feel like my thought has always been if they had more characters, live entertainment, and removed all the weird timeline restrictions, which they still haven't done in Florida, it would be fun. I mean, yes, it should probably have a third attraction, but to me, Rise of the Resistance, I appreciate the ambition. I wish it didn't break down so much.
Yeah.
Smuggler's Run's fine as a second attraction. The place, they spent a lot of money on the setting. I'm never going to spend that money to do the lightsabers or the droids, so that doesn't matter. Oga's, it's cool, I guess. But I just think they really, where I hope they're fixing it at Disneyland with Boba Fett and Mando and all that, but they need to like ramp that up like considerably. It's a wasted opportunity.
Well, you have kids, right?
Yeah. Do
they say like, where is Darth Vader? Like that's, I just cannot believe that the like, you know what I mean? That it's just, and I was at the opening and there was this in California and there was this crazy stunt show. And I was like, oh, this is great. This will be great every day. And it was like, no, that was the one time they ever did it, was that opening. And it was like, what? Like, we all know that all that stuff is there. It's all in the catwalks, and there were supposed to be two different stunt shows depending on when you went in. And yeah, there's like complete lack of like kinetic excitement. It's all like brown. Like, what a cool land. We're in this like brown desert. It's like, I don't know what they were thinking, but I don't think it works very well.
Yeah, and I can't argue with you. I feel like they did certain things well, but they needed to go that extra bit. But at least they got the second attraction. They don't have it sometime in the future. But circling back though, it does all relate though to this blue sky thing, because I was saying the momentum was building to something big, and I was like, okay, they've announced a lot of little things, Hatbox Goes, Figment, all that. Okay, that's good. That's fine. I don't have any issues with that. Now it's leading up to, I thought it was going to be a retheme of Tomorrowland as myself. That's what I thought, or a Dinoland retheme. Those were the two things that seemed to make sense. And then they come out and they kind of do that. But here's the thing. You were talking about the aesthetics. What bothered me about Dinoland, I feel like the concept art with Moana, if you made that like a Polynesian area, it could work. But the way they explained it, like, we could choose Moana or we could choose Utopia, and then the other part, we could choose this or this. It's all about choosing which brand fits. It's not about at all what theme fits. I don't know if that struck with you.
Well, you're sort of downplaying how bizarre that section was, because it was Jennifer Lee from Disney Animation, and it was an Imagineer. I forget which Imagineer was it.
It was Chris Beatty, the Imagineer.
Chris Beatty,
one of
okay.
The leaders of Imagineering, yeah.
Who both looked like they had no idea what was happening, and they just were vamping for, I don't know, 20 minutes. And to me, it felt very much like, you're right, we didn't have the big thing. I mean, when the biggest thing for California you're announcing is a bakery in downtown Disney that we've all already been to if you live in Southern California, and a dumpling restaurant. It was like, oh boy. So they were just sort of like, well, we could do this, we could do that, we could, and it was like there was nothing about how it was sort of going to fit.
Right.
You and I have heard rumors for years about Conservation Station really being the place that Zootopia would be, because you would get on the train, which I think is a very kind of underrated experience going over there. And it's like, yeah, that I guess the predator prey thing could fit into Animal Kingdom, but I still think that Avatar works so well because you learn about keystone species while you're waiting for that, for that attraction. Like, it fits, and it's the only place in the world that land is, which makes it super special. Yeah, it was completely baffling. That whole thing was just insane. It was so far away from blue sky too. It felt like, we're used to looking at concept art where there's a balloon and a rainbow covering one part, and it was like, this was like, a Rorschach test or something, trying to figure out what was actually going on. And especially when they were talking about Beyond Big Thunder,
Yeah.
which was like this crazy mishmash of Coco, which is like, why wasn't anybody from Pixar up there if they're talking about Coco? But regardless, Coco, Encanto, and the villains, something
Right.
like, I mean, it was so weird because it was like, this is what it was like. Well, what if you could walk around the casita? And it was like, yeah, what if you could walk around the casita? Like,
sounds great. It's very easy. It's like, yeah, that sounds fun. Sure.
Tell me
that's
more. Oh, you're not? Okay.
Yeah, I liked Encanto. I enjoyed Coco. I like Moana. Zootopia was fine. I mean,
yeah,
but I get it. I mean, I understand. But so none of those properties are bad on their own. And sure, villains, if you could somehow connect Fantasyland and have a corner of it where it's, sure, that sounds cool. You put it near the Haunted Mansion, you could do something. But this to me was a little too like, and then the question I thought of was they put up that timeline, 2022, 23, 24. And I'm like, when would this happen? Because if they're just talking about it now, Dino Land, parts of it need to be fixed. Not Dinosaur, but some of the other parts need to be replaced like now.
And Dinosaur is on its like last leg. If you look at some of those videos,
the effects don't work so well. Yeah, I went there. The effects were not working very well in March, I will tell you.
Yeah. So we're getting into like kind of big picture territory, right? Because the Imagineers, I've talked to people that say that there are fewer than 50 Imagineers left at Disney after the purge is what I call it. So you got a reduced workforce who are scattered and also in Florida. They're on their way to Florida. They've got the stupid thing in Palm Springs they're working on. There's 2 more ships coming. You're trying to compete with a brand new state-of-the-art Universal Park that is opening in 2025 that you have no response to. Because you're right, none of this stuff, even if they started working on it tomorrow, would be done. I mean, how long have they been working on Tron? And they already built one across the world in Shanghai. I mean, it's insane how they're just completely being caught off guard. I mean, it's really something. I've never really seen them on the back foot like this before.
Yeah, they did a little bit when Harry Potter came, but again, that was a Universal where Universal was, I mean, I went to those parks before Harry Potter. Universal was struggling. I mean, they were really struggling. So I understand Disney waited a while and then they didn't expect Harry Potter would be so big and Universal would show, hey, you can make tons of money selling butterbeer and all that other things. And they kind of weirdly responded with Pandora, which ended up being much better than I figured. But here, I'm baffled because you've got, and I know we're kind of veering way off aesthetics here, but you've got Tron next year, spring. I think they're pushing that back like they did with Ratatouille. And then you have the Tiana, Princess and the Frog, which I think is a cool idea at both coasts, 2024. I don't know what else they're going to have. I mean, Moana Journey of Water, but I mean, what else in terms of big headliners? Maybe something but the next D23 Expo is in 2024. I don't know. It's weird. It's like something has to open the next year after that, right?
I don't know. I mean, there's nothing on the calendar. I mean, with the Mary Poppins ride isn't happening, and
Play Pavilion's done, I guess.
Yeah, Play Pavilion's done. The Sky, whatever they were calling that Outlook and Epcot isn't happening. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's rough. And Universal has been really committed to also like, pumping up the existing parks, whether it's the Velocicoaster or there's that new Minions thing coming in, and
Well, yeah, Hagrid, Secret Life of Pets, some
Hagrid's
really
Secret
good
Life of
stuff.
Pets.
You know,
Yeah, I mean, a marquee attraction every year, which is really insane and impressive. And they're really starting to plus up the Hollywood park too, with Mario's coming in, Donkey Kong is coming in, and that crazy Fast and Furious coaster, which is going to be so fun and so cool, all up and down the hill. It's going to be amazing.
that sounds nuts. I don't even
It's
totally understand.
Yeah, I mean, Jim was telling me that at one point it goes underneath the escalator. I was like, okay, whatever you say, I'm in. Yeah, it's really interesting. I do think it relates to aesthetics because there is not even a marquee, hotel opening or anything. Like, you think about 1989 and how the Swan and Dolphin opened, Disney MGM opens, Pleasure Island opens, the Typhoon Lagoon opens. This is all in one year. I mean, it's insane.
Yeah.
And I think one of the Yacht Club, Beach Club hotels opened by the end of the year, and the next one opened in '90, which I think is what Swan and Dolphin did too. But I mean, absolutely insane. And there's just nothing like that. There's nothing to get excited about at Disney World. I mean, these towers are awful, and yeah,
Splash Mountain opened at Disneyland in '89 too, I think.
89, there you go.
Yeah, I think that. I mean, it was later in Disney World, but I think that was '89 also. Yeah, and then you think about even the year before. I mean, you'd have things like you said, the Nori Pavilion, the Wonders of Life was going to open, and the Living Seas open. I mean, it's just
and that Wonders of Life was '89 too. That's right. That was October. Yeah,
crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, that Living Seas was earlier, but still, all in that like three. That was when I was going so often. Yeah, I hope I'm not that optimistic, but I would feel like because they have to be having these conversations internally. I mean, I go to the parks. You are much more into the industry. I am just a guy who goes to the parks and does a podcast, and I can see it. These are not, from what I can tell, not dumb people. You would think they would realize we got to do something, because even like with Pandora, they did a knee-jerk thing, and then they had New Fantasyland, but they had something, and they even adjusted New Fantasyland to add Seven Dwarfs Mine Train. They were doing things. Here, it's like they're not doing much. I don't know.
Yeah. And Chapek is not a guy with a lot of passions. You know what I mean? Like, he's not. Eisner was the last creative executive in charge of the company. He was an English major, which, obviously I very much sympathize with. But I think Iger was a great kind of portfolio manager. He admits repeatedly in his memoir, not a creative guy, but He trusted people. And Chapek is just this kind of nerd who is, he was a scientist, and he came from home video, and he made a bunch of Air Buddies sequels. And, that is kind of his thing. Like, he's not a creative person. Look at his house. I mean, if Eisner is getting, Frank Gehry to design his cabin, and then you look at, Chapek's super gross McMansion that he bought for $12 million, it's like, these are not the same people. They don't have the same passion, and they don't have that kind of intellectual curiosity. It was Stags that greenlit Galaxy's Edge with the stunt shows, with all of that. Right. It was Chapek that opened Galaxy's Edge when he was head of Parks and Consumer Products, and the one that cut all that stuff. So there is an insane kind of gulf intellectually and creatively, I feel like, with this administration that is really hard. And just as much as Eisner, letting Bob Stern build buildings and that are still there, all the things that Chapek implements are going to be there for so long. And, I heard from, Imagineering circles after that presentation at D23 was like, yeah, but we're really putting things in the park quickly. That was like their kind of like, that was what they were going to kind of die, the hill they were going to die on, which is true. Like, how long did it take The Little Mermaid to have a ride? We had the Baxter version that fell apart, and now the kind of crummy
like
Omnimover version. Yeah, 20 years. So like, having the Casita theoretically in the next 5 years would be something. And obviously, we're in this new ecosystem where everything has to feed another part of the business. So the Casita opening will feed Encanto 2 or a Disney Plus series. which will in turn feed a live action remake that will, it's like, it's so interconnected now. But the other big aesthetic change from those, like, I would say, well, when did Expedition Everest open? 98?
No, it was much later. It was like '06 or something. It
Okay.
was,
So
Expedition Everest, yeah.
Expedition, that was like the last non-IP kind of hurrah, right?
Yeah, the other ones were updates like Test Track and
Test Track, right?
Soarin', those types of updates. Yeah,
right. So like that's the other thing is that's the other thing I took away from that D23 presentation is like you're gonna run out of this stuff eventually, and Pirates of the Caribbean is $1 billion franchise that started in the parks. There needs to be something else like that. We're having this like there's like competing C projects. There's a movie with Ryan Reynolds and there's a TV show on Disney Plus, but
might help.
It might help. We need it.
Well, yeah, because then you think, I had this thought the other day, like, oh, if they could only do like some sort of Horizons movie, then they would want a part. Then they want something.
Here's my Horizons movie detail for you. The movie Oblivion. Obviously, all roads lead back to Tom Cruise. That movie was initially set up at Disney. And Joe Kosinski once told me that Disney called it Horizons because they were trying to tie it back to the attraction.
Oh, my gosh.
How that would have worked? It's kind of a bleak movie.
The movie ends up being very bleak by the end, yes. I mean, not the very end, but like...
But that was the intention, was to tie it back. I don't know how, but... yeah, I'm ready. Let's do it.
Yeah, the SEA, I mean, hey, maybe that'll get them to bring Mystic Manor to the United States. Sure, go for it. Do it.
No, it just feels like it's I think the entire company right now is just kind of in a kind of creatively stalled position. Mm-hmm. Everything's a remake or a sequel or an MCU or, whatever.
I mean, a little bit. I mean, of course, like the pandemic had an impact but if you think about Epcot, Spaceship Earth, I mean, I wrote it and that needs a mechanical update, if nothing else. They need to get the air conditioning fixed. But part of me is like, do I want them updating Spaceship Earth? I mean, I know the descent is needs to be fixed. It's the Siemens, descent that from 2007. But I'm like, if they could just make it run okay, I don't know. I don't know if I want that fixed right now. I might want to wait until someone else is in charge.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, how close we got to Moana being in Spaceship Earth. Like, it was going to happen. Who was your first Spaceship Earth narrator?
Well, I technically wrote it with the first narrators in '84, but I have no memory. I know I was there in '84 when I was 8. I have a memory of that trip, but it's not like when I was 8, I was like, I mean, I think now it's Vic Perrin. It keeps going back and forth with the first one. The one I remember the most is Cronkite from when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the one that, and then Jeremy Irons. But being a kid, it was like whatever one you ride the first few times is like ingrained in your brain.
Yeah, same way.
I'm amazed when I look back at the videos.
We had a lot of Cronkite representation back in the day between that and the animation.
Yeah, with Robin Williams.
Yeah,
that whole thing. It was Back to Neverland.
Back to Neverland. We love it. Yes.
Well, you mentioned Tom Cruise. I want to make sure before we finish to mention your awesome podcast, Light the Fuse, which I know you focused on Mission Impossible, but I know you've gone and talked about Maverick and Lightyear and so many other things. But, I feel really, already I'm like 2 degrees from Michael Eisner with talking with you.
Yeah.
I am also 2 degrees from Tom Cruise.
It's true.
So, I mean, first of all, I'd love to hear a little bit about, your interest in the Mission Impossible films, but then also the evolution of that, where you end up talking not only to Christopher McQuarrie a lot and some of the actors, but then to Tom Cruise, which is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it was, we were obsessed with these movies. Me and my co-host, Charles Soto, is a great filmmaker, but we just started it before Fallout, and we had no idea where it was going to go. And then we kind of, we're kind of embedded with the filmmakers now these days. And what they're doing for 7 and 8 is it's amazing. I wish I could say more, but it's really like next level. If you thought Fallout was crazy, holy hell, it is next level. But yeah, I mean, we love them all. And yeah, having McQuarrie on the 200th, he was on the 100th, which was peak pandemic times. And he said, on the 200th, I'll get you Cruise. And we said, okay, all right. I even asked him in the episode, where is he? Like, come on. And he was at Wimbledon with my wife. And then I was, we were on the Zoom chat and I saw his wife, Heather, who's lovely. She pops up in the in the list of people, and I was like, oh my god, she's with him. They're coming back from Wimbledon. They're gonna be on the show, and it was amazing. It was really amazing. Charles tried a bit with him that failed horribly, but ended up getting some good results. And it was supposed to be a 10-minute chat that ended up being 50 minutes. So, and he's just very supportive. I mean, everybody is on the production, and we have a lot of great stuff coming up. And I'm so glad you like it. I mean, I have no idea who's listening or who, it's like you do these things and it's just beaming out to the void.
I can't remember how I found out about it because it was one of those where I used to write a lot about movies just on the side. Now I don't as much, and with kids, I don't watch as many as I should. But I still love movie podcasts in general.
Yeah.
And so I remember hearing, I forget what was the first. I think it might have been one of the ones where McQuarrie went through all the movies.
Yeah.
Where he was really digging in to, I forget which one it was, if it was Rogue Nation or I don't think it was Fallout. But just in general, I feel like, wow, it's cool. And plus now with having, he's so interesting as a guest. And then I just listened, you talked to Maggie Q, I listened to,
yeah,
she was really funny. But then listen to that Tom Cruise one. Yeah, I figure he comes on, he's going to be like, good job, guys, and give you a thumbs up or something and then leave. And then he was on for so long.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was really amazing. And I really thank McQuarrie and Eddie Hamilton, who, they also worked on Top Gun and is a big reason why that movie is so amazing. But yeah, I mean, we're really kind of like, I ran into Brad Bird at a screening of Ghost Protocol a couple weeks ago, and he was like, I was listening, and I was like, they're not telling the truth. I got to call Drew. And it was like, okay, we are now we're in the crosshairs of everybody that has made these movies. But it's really wonderful because you get such great stories, and they've worked on so many movies. And what we really try to do with the podcast is illuminate every strata of filmmaking. So it's not just Tom Cruise and Christopher McQuarrie. We just had a caterer on. We've had visual effects people like John Knoll and Todd Vaziri and all these people that were in the ILM documentaries. And, we've had composers. Brian De Palma has been on. It is really the gamut. And if you love movies, even if you don't love Mission Impossible, I feel like you'll love the show because we've done 6 episodes with Paul Hirsch. The man edited Ferris Bueller and Star Wars. Come on, he is amazing. We get such great stories, and I think people really respond to our enthusiasm. I think that's what Cruise really responded to, obviously, is okay, these guys are really excited, and he appreciates that. So it's been a really wonderful, unexpected journey. And Dan, I really appreciate you listening because I have no idea who does. And, obviously, these shows are a lot of work.
Yeah. All right. Real quick, I have to tell you.
Oh, you're going to give me your ranking.
Yes. I've been okay, so top and bottom, top 2, bottom 1, easy. I will say I think all the movies have something good about them.
Are you going worst to best or best to worst?
I was going to go best to worst.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I'm going to say I've rewatched most of them recently, especially 3, 5, and 6. I think 6 is the best. I have to say I rewatched it. And then I'd say 4 because I feel like that one's a revelation when it comes out. Amazing. Then I'm going to say 1, but I feel like the next 3, 1, 3, and 5, the next 3 are all really close. I could flip those around.
See, our top good. 3 are the same, just in different orders. Yeah. I think so 1, 4, and 6 those are the kind of holy trinity. But yeah, go ahead.
And then 3, which I think 3 is very good, but the third act, I don't know. Yes. But Philip Seymour Hoffman, incredible, but the way it ends. And then 5 is really good. I just feel like with 6 and 4 around it, it builds stuff up, though, for 6.
And introduce Ilsa.
Yeah. I used to really be into John Woo movies, and I remember loving 2. I think some parts of it are very fun. The motorcycle scenes, all that, the doves, whatever. But it has to be at the bottom, but it's still not a bad movie. No. It's just the worst of the 6 for me.
I agree. Great lit. Well, and you haven't told me, what are you, a long hair guy, a short hair guy? What are you?
I think the short hair works better. The long hair looks a little ridiculous. Okay. I gotta say. I mean, the long hair though does work for 2 really well though.
Well, it works for 4 too because he's on the side of the building.
Oh, that is true. So you can really it's the hair's blowing and everything.
Yes, yeah. Really catches those Abu Dhabi or Dubai winds, yeah.
But I think I've only seen the trailer for 7. I purposely haven't read much about it, but I would say it's going to be up there. I have a feeling.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. 7 is going to be insane. 8 is on another level. Like what they're doing, none of which I could actually share, but is absolutely insane. I mean, it's going to be so special. And if it's his last one, it's going to wrap up everything so beautifully.
Yeah, I never would have guessed, even though I enjoyed one a lot, but I never would have guessed they'd be where the franchise would go. I mean, like I said, 4 was the one where I watched it and I'm like, this feels, not that 3 was very good. J.J. Abrams, love Alias.
Yeah.
But, and it feels a lot like Alias. Number 3 does.
Yes.
He was making it a little before that.
Yes.
But 4 with Brad Bird, I was just like, even they start the credits and I'm like, oh, this is different.
Yes.
And from there, I think it's just been awesome all the way through.
Yeah. That was where Charles and I went and saw it opening day, and we looked at each other, and we were just having the time of our lives. And yeah, that's where the title comes from. Cruise saying "Light the Fuse" at the beginning of 4. So yeah,
that's the moment.
That's the moment. That's where it all happened.
You're like, oh,
yeah, yeah. But
this movie's different.
If you're interested in movies, listen. We did a great miniseries on Maverick called "Like the Fuselage" earlier this year, which we will be doing more of that, I hope, soon. Yeah, I appreciate you listening, Dan. It means a lot.
Well, definitely. And I also like us ending on a positive note while talking about, being excited for Dead Reckoning and all this, with I'm feeling good now. I was feeling a little down a few minutes ago.
We're back.
But now I'm feeling good again.
It's like you and I have just been spending 20 minutes workshopping what could go into Magic Kingdom in front of a room full of 7,000 people and a live streamed audience.
Like, oh, that was interesting. Okay, let's talk about Mission Impossible. Yeah. Let's do that. Well, Drew, this has been really fun. We should definitely do it again. But I'd love for you to tell everyone. I know you write all over the place.
Yes.
So where should people find you, either your work or if they want to follow you on social media and stuff?
Yeah, well, I mean, I am a film reporter for The Wrap, which is a Hollywood trade. So I'm over there posting every day. So that's thewrap.com. And then you can follow me on social media at Drew Tailored, a tailored shirt on Instagram and Twitter. And yeah, please do. And please let me know what you think. Tell us what your favorite postmodern Disney building is. Let's get this going. Let's get the resurgence.
We're starting it here.
We're starting it here.
Yeah, this is the start.
Yes.
Well, Drew, no, that was great to talk about, and thanks so much for being on the show.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
If you're interested in learning more about Disney and postmodern architecture, a great book that you should check out is called Building a Dream, The Art of Disney Architecture by Beth Dunlop. Has a lot more background about what Drew and I discussed on this show. It's a cool coffee table book. The only challenge is it's out of print and very expensive, so if you see a good deal on it, snatch it up. You will not be disappointed. If you'd like to support this show, there's several ways to do so. You can become an official member of the Tomorrow Society through Patreon, get access to some really cool perks, including bonus podcast episodes. Go to patreon.com/Tomorrow Society to learn more. You can also make a one-time contribution by buying me a Dole Whip. Go to tomorrowsociety.com/Dole Whip to learn more. If you'd like to get a hold of me, send me an email, dan@tomorrowsociety.com. Follow me on Twitter at TomorrowSOC, Facebook or Instagram at Tomorrow Society, and subscribe to the Tomorrow Society podcast channel on YouTube. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. I put together a brief survey about the podcast, which you can find at tomorrowsociety.com/survey. It's just a few questions. What you think about the show, what you like, what you don't. I really appreciate any input that you can provide. The music for this show was written by Adam Hookey, performed by the Sophisticated Babies. Next time, I will be talking with Len Testa of Touring Plans, The Unofficial Guide, and The Disney Dish, all about what's currently happening right now with Disney, also Universal's Epic Universe, and where both companies may be going in the next few years and beyond. Thanks so much for listening, and I will talk to you again next time.